Welcome to On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by Review Maxer.
Hello and welcome to On Top of PR. I'm your host, Jason Mudd with Axia Public Relations. And today we have special guest Mort Crim joining us. Mort is a journalist, author, lecturer, and motivational speaker. He is the main inspiration for TV news anchor character Ron Burgundy in the Anchorman movie series. His network and local broadcast experience in both radio and television include 5 years as a correspondent with ABC News in New York and 2 decades as a senior editor and anchor for WDIV-TV NBC Detroit. For 5 years, he was backup for Paul Harvey. He is the author of 8 books. His most recent, a memoir entitled Anchored, A Journalist's Search for Truth. Mort, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jason. Nice to be here. And I should point out that I'm nothing like Ron Burgundy. I enjoyed the parody, but it was just that. It was satire.
So tell me, how did you get connected in that role to be kind of a consultant, an advisor for that movie?
Well, I wasn't actually a consultant, but Will Ferrell had seen me being interviewed on, I believe it was the Lifetime channel, in a documentary about the late Jessica Savage, with whom I had co-anchored in Philadelphia.
Okay.
Will's co-writer and co-producer, Adam Mackey, had grown up in Philadelphia, I guess had watched me on TV. And so when Will mentioned that he had seen me doing this interview regarding Jessica Savage, and he later told Rolling Stone magazine that it was from that interview that he got the idea that parodying or satirizing a local anchor team could be great fun. And that's exactly what they did. So Veronica Corningstone was actually patterned after Jessica Savage, and Ron Burgundy was patterned after my career. And when I met Will at the after party, he invited my wife and me to the premiere of Anchorman 2 in New York. Met him at the after party, and he had seen several of my interviews, because once he revealed in Rolling Stone magazine that I was the person behind the satire, then I started getting requests for interviews from Fox and Friends, The Today Show, Good Morning America, CNN. And he had seen several of these interviews where people were asking me, how does it feel to be the subject of that kind of parody? And he thanked me for taking it with good humor. And I said, well, Will, frankly, if you had billed those movies as documentaries, I would be thoroughly pissed. But I said, as satire, I thought they were good fun. And you have to laugh at yourself. You have to laugh at your profession. You have to keep a light touch as you go through life.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not sure of the exact timelines, but I'm pretty confident you and I met before those movies came out, or possibly around the same time. And so, I've never really viewed you as being a Ron Burgundy, but I also didn't really know you in your younger years. At the end of the day, it is a comedy. I've had the good fortune of doing a little bit of stand-up comedy myself and being around stand-up comedians. And as we both know, I mean, they're just up there telling stories, and 90% of what they tell you, they've just fabricated or exaggerated, sure, whether they borrowed them from observation, from something that happened to themselves, or a story a friend told them. And, it's kind of like what they say, never meet your heroes, and, never see the sausage being made kind of thing. And so sometimes you get to know people and you think a story they told really happened to them and it's so funny. And then when you realize that it's just completely made up by their imagination, at least to me, it's not nearly as funny anymore. So it's almost better to not know those kind of inside stories.
Well, I reminded Will Ferrell that he wasn't the first one to parody local TV Anchorman. If you remember Ted Knight from the old Mary Tyler Moore Show, playing the role of Ted Baxter, who was this airheaded, buffoon of an anchorman. And I had the pleasure of having Ted Knight on my newscast one evening, in which he did his shtick, and it was really pretty funny. We didn't tell the audience. We came out of a commercial, and he was sitting there beside me.
Nice. Well, and so I'm glad you're here today on our show because I bet you've got a ton of stories. I know we've got a few lined up we want to talk about. And as we were talking before we hit record, I recently kind of saw you do a cameo in a TV series called The Detroiters. It's about two guys who are basically trying to turn around one of their father's advertising agency, and I guess the foolish exploits and mistakes they make along the way trying to be successful. And I think it's a really good kind of buddy comedy. And I liked it, of course, because one, it's about, the advertising industry of which I'm adjacent to with a PR firm, but also because I have family, as we talked about earlier, in the Detroit area. So it was really fun to see you on those shows and kind of maybe explain to our audience who hasn't seen that show what your role was on it.
Well, The Detroiters was a sitcom. I had never been in a sitcom, never expected to be in a sitcom. But when the one of the talent agents who was responsible for booking the actors and performers for the show called me, and she said, "We need a newscaster." And one of the producers of the show said, "We need a Mort Crim type." She said, "Well, Mort's retired. Why don't you just get Mort Crim?" So they called and said they would like me to do a cameo, about a 30 or 40-second appearance in each of the shows it ran for 2 seasons. And the bit was that I had this thing called the Chump of the Week.
Yeah, that's what it was. Chump of the Week.
They would show my picture on a television screen, usually in a bar in Detroit. Mm-hmm. And I was announcing the Chump of the Week, and they wrote the script for me, and I recorded the clips here in Jacksonville, and then sent them up to Detroit. Well, then in the second season, I got a call from the producer who said, "We want to feature you in one episode, which we're going to entitle Mort." Very original title. And so I had the pleasure of going up and shooting an entire episode where I wasn't just doing a cameo, but the whole episode was built around me playing myself. But it was fun. It was fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would describe it as a fun show, and I turned my cousins up in Detroit onto it, and they all seemed to like it. So, especially because it had so much local flavor, featuring local brands like Domino's and Little Caesars, and
it was all shot in Detroit. It was all shot in Detroit.
Yeah, and of course the automakers and all that stuff. So I thought it was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. I believe it was on Comedy Central, but I could be wrong.
That's correct. In fact, it was produced by Lorne Michaels, who produces Saturday Night Live, created Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, I didn't know that. You've definitely had your own. It's very interesting to me. You've had your own career, and then you retired, and now you've had like this additional career of comedy and comedy adjacent, right? And also writing books. So I don't know if you fully understood what retirement means, but I think you've had a pretty good retirement.
Well, I have a philosophy that if you run fast enough, old age can't catch you.
There you go.
And I still play tennis 3 days a week. I played this morning with a bunch of guys in my age category, senior men's tennis at Queens Harbor. And I played with this same group for about 20 years. And of course, at various times, guys have to drop out because of illness or injury, and we've lost a few to death. But I travel a lot. I continue to write. I continue to stay actively involved. One of the most recent things that I did professionally was to voice over the trailers for a hot young star named Olivia Rodrigo. And I didn't know, frankly, who Olivia Rodrigo was, but my grandkids certainly did. And it turns out she is probably the hottest young female singer going these days. And so I've done some trailers for her. I stay active, and I think even though I'm retired, and it does give me a chance to travel. I just got back from Vietnam and Cambodia, and I'm putting together a documentary based on that trip, which I'm about 10% through. But I try not to be sedentary, either mentally or physically. I think I'm blessed with good genes. I'm going to be 90 years old next July.
Oh my goodness.
And to be able to be as active as I am, ride my bicycle 3 days a week, play tennis 3 days a week, and then travel all over the world, I certainly am blessed with good genetics. But I think also, and you can't control your genetics, but I think the things I can control are taking care of myself and staying active and keeping a positive attitude. Those are the things that are within our control.
Absolutely. Love that. Love that. Totally agree with that. Yeah. So, and I got to imagine if you really were living life like Anchorman, you probably would not be able to live into your late 80s, right? With the
highly
lifestyle
unlikely. Highly unlikely. I think guys who live like that burn out rather quickly.
Right. And then some of them don't. Some of them just live forever, because they've got
Seems
really
like
good
it.
genes.
And again, you can't predict what the genetics will do for you.
Right. So, I'd love to just kind of talk about a few of your journalistic career highlights. I know that you were part of space program launches, Carnegie Hall. We talked a little bit about Anchorman, and you even travel with President Johnson. Tell us give us kind of some of your favorite stories there.
Well, I guess the most exciting news assignment that I ever had was covering space. I was with ABC based in New York, and partly because I am a licensed airline transport rated pilot. I've always taken flying very seriously, flew until I was 85. And then I just voluntarily gave it up because I thought, I started flying at 15 and I said, I've had 70 years of accident-free flying.
Right.
Maybe, you got to know when it's time to hang it up. And I just had the feeling that was the time to do it. But with that background and having been in the Air Force, and I was a journalist for the Air Force, and I covered the space program out at Vandenberg when they were first organizing that as a missile base and a missile test base. So when I went to ABC in New York with my background, both in the Air Force and as a civilian pilot, they assigned me to the space program, along with a very well-known former NBC anchor named Merrill Muller, who Merrill is deceased now. He was not a young man at the time, but Merrill and I co-hosted the space shots from Gemini 3 through Apollo 12, and that was when I left ABC in New York and went into television anchoring. First in Louisville, Kentucky, and then Philadelphia, then Chicago, and finally the bulk of my career was spent anchoring for the NBC station in Detroit.
What a great time to be alive and a great time to be reporting, for sure. That's pretty incredible. Mm-hmm. I've got a note here about Carnegie Hall. What is your relationship with Carnegie Hall?
Well, I got off the telephone. I got a call from a producer friend of mine and got off the phone, and I told my wife, I said, guess what? I am going to be on stage live at Carnegie Hall. Well, she knew immediately it wasn't my piano playing, because I play piano, but not at the Carnegie Hall level by any means. What happened was I had a syndicated commentary series called Second Thoughts that was on about 1,300 radio stations.
Yeah, I remember that.
And after 9/11, I just got inspired to write a commentary, a metaphor about Uncle Sam and how he had survived and how America would survive this attack and that we would be strong again. And I wrote this up and put it on my commentary series, and this producer friend of mine heard it, and he said, we are putting on a musical tribute at Carnegie Hall, bringing in some very well-known singers and bands and groups to pay homage to the first responders, to the members of the police and fire department, Salvation Army, all the people who had been in there helping after that tragedy of the Twin Towers. He said, I've heard your commentary, and I would love to have you come to Carnegie Hall and read it, and we'll put some patriotic music behind it, and we think that would be a good addition to our program. So it was recorded. You got a standing ovation. I was very proud of that.
Nice.
And it's available. Anybody that wants to see it, you just put in my name, Mort Crim, on Google search, and then add The Survivor, because that was the name of the piece, Mort Crim, The Survivor.
Okay.
And it'll bring up that presentation.
Perfect. Well, we'll be sure to put a link to it in our episode notes to help our audience find it real quickly. We always try to do that, provide, the resources that we talk about during the episode in the actual episode notes, and our audience can find those at ontopofpr.com. So, well, Mort, before we take a break here, kind of midway through our episode, I wanted to just cover another topic we wanted to explore today, which is your strategies for maintaining a respected public image throughout your career. You seem to be well liked and seem to have a great reputation. So maybe that's part of what you're going to share with us, but would love to hear your strategies for maintaining a respected public image throughout your career and how that might apply to the other PR practitioners that are listening to this episode and helping them with the executives and the companies and organizations they're leading.
I think if I were to boil it down to a single word, it would be authenticity. I think an image needs to grow out of what you really are. I got amused when Will Ferrell, in his interview with Rolling Stone, he said, I was watching this guy, Mort Crim, and he still had he carried his anchor voice with him. And I thought, well, does Will think that I have one voice for anchoring the news and another voice for ordering a ham sandwich or reading a bedtime story to my grandkids? I have one voice. And I think you need to be an integrated single person. I think television is pretty revealing. And one of my heroes, and I had the pleasure of knowing him and actually working with him down at Cape Kennedy during the Cape Canaveral, which later was Cape Kennedy, Walter Cronkite. And the thing that gave Walter he was voted the most trusted man in America, I don't know how many times. Mm-hmm. The reason he was trusted is because Walter was the same off camera, on camera. What you saw was what you got. He didn't put on an act.
Right.
And so I think image starts with who are you really? Mm-hmm. And hopefully you are the kind of person that you don't have to put up a fake facade. You can just let who you are come through. And I think the genuineness and authenticity, I had a friend, a fellow anchor, and he said it as a joke, but he said, he said, authenticity is the most important value for an anchorman. And once you learn to fake that, the rest is easy.
Yeah, very true.
You can't fake authenticity. Whether you're a politician or an anchorman, I think eventually what you are will come through.
Mort, we've all been in this business long enough. We've seen people have quick rises and quick falls, or rise to the top. And when they're at the top, you really see how they behave and how they act. And then when they're at when they run into an event in their career where maybe they find themselves in need of employment or something like that, you kind of always remember how they treated you. And my lesson learned from that is just be kind to others, and never have an ego or have arrogance about yourself, because you never know when you're going to need help or the support of others in your community.
Jason, kindness doesn't cost anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Being respectful of your fellow human beings. Yep. Aside from any good that it might do you, as you say, you go to the top of the ladder, you're going to meet those same people when you're coming down. But how much more rewarding life is when we're nice to people.
Yep.
How much happier we are when we're just decent human beings. And I've always felt sorry for people who felt that they had to put themselves above others and in the process put others down.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that, and I just saw the movie Reagan, which, by the way, if you haven't seen it, it's an excellent movie. I like biopics, particularly when they follow history. And because I covered so much of the national news during the time that Reagan was president, I had the chance to meet him and to have lunch with him one day at the White House, sit right next to him. But one of the things that gave Reagan his popularity, even among people who disagreed with him, and you see in the movie how he and Tip O'Neill, who was the Democratic leader in the House and the Speaker, but Reagan had a charm that was based on the fact that he genuinely liked people. And whether you agreed with his policy, whether, it didn't matter whether you were Democrat or Republican, he was an authentic person and he was likable.
Yep.
And I just think there is so much, you use the word kindness. Boy, if there's anything we need in our country these days, it is more kindness.
Yeah.
It's out there, there are people in local communities and various situations who are being kind, but so much of the other stuff makes it into the news and into our political discourse. And why? Why can't we just be nice to each other? Right.
Exactly. I totally agree. Well, for our audience, I hope they'll be nice and stay with us as we take a quick break and come back on the other side with more with Mort Crim.
I'll stay here.
You're listening to On Top of PR with your host, Jason Mudd. Jason is a trusted advisor to some of America's most admired and fastest growing brands. He is the managing partner at Axia Public Relations, a PR agency that guides news, social, and web strategies for national companies. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to On Top of PR. I'm your host, Jason Mudd, with Axia Public Relations, joined by Mort Crim, who is, allegedly the inspiration for the TV news anchor character Ron Burgundy in the Anchorman movie series, but professionally denies being Anchorman or Ron Burgundy in real life, which is great. So what we want to talk about on the second half is how the media has changed since your time being active in the career and how you adapted, your newest book and underlying themes, and then advice for the next generation of communication professionals. So we've got a lot to cover in the second half here, and I'm excited about that, Mort. So let's talk about how the media has changed since your time and how you've adapted.
There wasn't a lot of change during the time that I was in media. I think the lightning changes have all occurred really since I retired. We went from black and white to color TV. There were technological advances. We went from film to videotape. We went from doing everything either on film or tape to doing a lot of live shots. So we went from a paper teleprompter to a computerized teleprompter. So there were technological changes that took place. But my goodness, the things that have changed since I left the business have been at astronomical speed. And the biggest thing has been the introduction of the internet and the cell phone. The internet, because it has absolutely proliferated the sources from which people can obtain information. Not all of it good information, as we know. Some of it is conspiratorial. Some of it is just patently false. Some of it is put out there with an agenda. And it becomes more and more difficult for all of us as citizens to sort through and figure out what's real, what's true, what's false. So the internet has played a huge role in the diversification of media. And then, of course, the advent of cable TV at almost the same time. These were developing side by side. And whereas when I was an anchorman, in any major market you went to, there were basically three sources for news. There was the ABC, NBC, and CBS stations. There would be a PBS station if it was a large enough market, and maybe one independent station or two. But your news sources were pretty much channeled through those television stations. Well, now you turn on your TV and your cable box or your internet streaming, and you have hundreds, 300, 400, 500 choices. So just the very proliferation of choices has meant huge changes. And it has required all of us to become our own editors in trying to sift and sort and figure out where can we get good, solid, honest information. I think the advent of the cell phone has made everybody a reporter.
Sure.
Now, that's good and it's bad. It's good because, well, let's take the example of police inappropriate behavior and brutality, and in some cases where police have actually killed somebody. The body cams or the ability of bystanders to take pictures of that have actually played a major role in justice being meted out in some of these situations. The cell phone has also given our legitimate reporters, that is, the people who are trained professional reporters, the ability to report from anywhere in the world. They have a satellite telephone. When I covered President Johnson and traveled through Asia and Australia, New Zealand, and those places with him, the challenges we had in getting film, everything was on film. We didn't have videotape in those days. So sometimes they would rush the film from maybe Tokyo back to New York, and then they would literally have a motorcycle carrier that worked for the network who would grab the can of film, run it into the network, put it in a processor. It might be 24 hours before the film of what had taken place, and this was true during the Vietnam War too. Before you would get verbal reports from the reporters, because you could send them over underground cable. But we didn't have satellites in those early days. And so by the time you saw the actual pictures of what was being talked about, it might be 24 hours. Well, now a reporter anywhere in the world with a satellite phone can send a picture report back to the States. So the technology is phenomenal, and the technology is wonderful.
Right.
But it also opens up, I always say that a person with a camera is no more a photographer than a person with a stethoscope is a doctor.
Sure, that's a good one.
I mean, journalism is a profession that requires, first of all, a commitment to honesty and truth. But secondly, you need training. You need to have some understanding and experience in how to recognize a story, how to organize a story, how to tell a story in a way that is meaningful to the audience.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because we talk about that a lot here on this program and in my other, speaking and other outreach, which is basically PR needs to be all about the audience of the news outlet when you're pitching media. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense for me to go pitch a journalist a story that's all about the company that I'm representing. It really needs to pivot its focus from what's interesting to the audience of the reporter you're pitching to. And otherwise, nobody's going to tune in if it's kind of like an advertisement or something like that.
It's all about the story. It really is. And history is made up of stories. We call journalists the people who write the first draft of history. But that hasn't changed for all of the technological changes, right, for all the proliferation of media. It's still about content. And I tell young people when they come to me for advice, and back in the day, there was a lot of that. I don't think they can find me now, hiding out here in a retirement community in Florida. But when I was advising young people and they would come into my office and they'd say, what should I do? I want to be a television journalist, or I want to be a broadcast journalist. And my advice to them was, well, forget about television and radio right now. Think about getting the best education you can and learn about life generally. There isn't any amount of learning in any subject field that isn't going to come in handy to you someday, somewhere in your reporting. And I found that true in my own life. Things that I thought when I was going through school, I'll never use this. But boy, as a reporter, sooner or later, that little bit of knowledge came up to the front of the brain, and you said, "Yeah, it's a good thing that I learned that." So I tell the kids, get the broadest, deepest education you can. Learn to write, learn to speak, learn to think, learn as much history, as much political science, as much about the world as you can. And then fundamental to everything, even broadcast journalism, is writing.
Absolutely.
Because the word starts with the written word, even if you're speaking it. Even if you don't write it down, you have to organize it in your brain as though you're writing it. So become a good writer. And if you're a good writer, I can teach you how to stand in front of a camera. I can teach you how to hold a microphone. I can teach you how to be a broadcaster. But I can't teach you how to think. And I can't teach you how to write Well, I could if I gave a writing course. But those are the things that you really need to focus on, and don't worry so much about, some of these kids go through these broadcast schools and they think they're going to come out after 6 months or a year of broadcast school being broadcasters. Well, what they're basically learning is the technical side of it. And
Yes.
That's easy to learn. That's the secondary part. You want to be a good broadcaster, learn to think, learn to write, learn to tell stories, learn to organize.
I like that a lot, Mort. And I've been telling people for years that just because I have Photoshop on my computer doesn't make me an artist, right? Just because I have the software, the tools, just because I have a chainsaw doesn't mean that I should be climbing up a tree and tearing down limbs, right?
You got it.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster. So, there was a stage in the rollout of technology where, parents were literally buying their kids Photoshop because they could become a graphic artist. And I'm like, well, they can become a technician and know how to click and move things around, but that doesn't make them an artist. And I think you made a very good point there. And, anybody can learn how to operate software. That doesn't mean that you're a professional at whatever that software is designed for. So,
correct.
So as we're wrapping up, we want to talk about your new book and its theme. And I also understand that we'll put a link to your website in our episode notes where you might have some sort of special offer for our audience.
This is the book. It's called Anchored: A Journalist's Search for Truth. It has a picture of Will Ferrell, Ron Burgundy on the front. I want to tell you something about this book because it started out to be a chronology of my experiences in life as a reporter. I've covered some really interesting stories. I mentioned the space program. I traveled around the world with President Lyndon Johnson. I covered 3 of his summit conferences. I covered the Reagan-Gorbachev Summit Conference in Washington. I've had an incredibly interesting life as a journalist, and that's what I started out to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me 3 years to write the story. I had to do a lot of research. I had to go back and check dates and go through my day planners, which fortunately I had saved over the years, and make sure that I was accurate in what I was telling. I sent it to my agent in New York, and she took about 2 weeks to read it. And she called me and she said, "Mort, really like your book. It's well written. I would have expected it to be well written, and your stories are fascinating." But she said, "I'm Jewish." And I said, "Well, of course, Susanna Einstein. I knew you weren't Irish."
Yeah.
She said, "Well, I never thought I would say this to somebody, but your book needs more Jesus." Now, I knew what she was talking about. She did not literally mean that I needed more religion in the book, or that I needed more Jesus. What she was telling me was that my personal spiritual struggle and my desire to answer life's big questions — is there a God? Right. Is there any purpose to the universe? The big cosmic issues. I grew up in a conservative minister's home. So I was given, quote, the truth, as many people are. You can be raised Catholic, you can be raised in a conservative or Orthodox Jewish community, you can be raised a Muslim, but we're all raised in these communities where our group has the truth. And I started to question things at a very early age. At about 15, I started to ask myself, how do I know this is true? How do I know that's true? Well, those questions and that journey, that search for truth kept popping up in my book, but it was just kind of a subtle undercurrent. What Susanna was telling me was, that is your story. There are a lot of journalists who've probably had more exciting careers than you've had, covered bigger stories than you've covered. But as interesting as all that is, your story is your search for truth. And I went back and took 2 more years to rewrite the book, not losing the story or the narrative about the career that I've had, but allowing that personal story, that personal search, that desire to know the answers to the big questions in life. let it come through and be a dominant part of the book. And I sent it back to her, and she said, now you've got it. Now you've got it. And so the publisher added the title. The book was just going to be called Anchored.
Right.
And the publisher added the title, A Journalist's Search for Truth. I think anybody who has been raised in a cocoon of certainty, that's what I call it, when we're raised to believe that our tribe, our group, our religion is the truth. Don't question it. Don't look for answers beyond that. It's a bubble. It's a bubble. And I think anybody who was raised in any kind of a bubble, but who began to question and wanted to know answers for themselves, will benefit from this book, because that's my story. That's my search for truth. And I'm going to offer this book at a $10 discount. It sells for $24.95.
Okay.
And if they go to my website, mortcrimspeaks.com, and put in the code word holiday,
okay,
that'll get you a $10 discount. And the book, and I'll sign the book. I'll autograph the book. You can get it from Amazon or the bookstores or any place else.
Right.
But if you go to my website, you get the $10 discount, and I will sign it to however you want it autographed.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, we appreciate you offering that, and we'll be sure to put a link to that in the episode notes as well to make it convenient for our audience. So, Mort, this has been a real pleasure talking to you. And as always, you've got great stories, and you're a very likable person, of course, and very popular in your career. So I just want to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with us and sharing with our audience. And really appreciate you, Mort.
It's been my pleasure, and you did a great interview, Jason. Good.
Oh, thank you.
Job.
I appreciate that.
Good job.
That means a lot coming from you. So I appreciate that. So
thank you.
All right, excellent. So with that, this has been another episode of On Top of PR. I hope you enjoyed it. A little bit different than our typical episode, having a special guest like Mort be here, but we were glad to have him and thankful for him sharing his insights during his career. If you value this episode and want to share it with a colleague or friend, please do just that. I'm sure they will really appreciate that you did that for them. And if you ever have a question or a topic you'd like to see us featured, please reach out to us as well. And with that, this is Jason Mudd signing off from On Top of PR. Be well.
This has been On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by ReviewMaxer. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and check out past shows at ontopofpr.com.